This is podcast number 1 for Chapter 7 on developing and maintaining the learning environment. One of the most difficult functions of teaching for beginning teachers is management. Teachers must elicit the cooperation of students to engage in learning and must develop and maintain a learning environment that supports learning. Hopefully, this chapter and this material will help you move students from teacher control to student self-control. The goal of a good management system should be to establish student responsibility for their own behavior. And you, as a beginning teacher, you need to have a good management system that suits your philosophy and your way of doing things. This first bullet is important for teachers to know, particularly beginning teachers. The gymnasium should be a place where all students can have positive experiences and feel physically and psychologically safe. That's our number one priority, is to make sure that students are safe. Teachers are also responsible for providing content that's appropriate and challenging, to develop and maintain a class that's conducive to learning, and to cultivate student responsibility. In other words, making students accountable for their learning and for their own behavior. Good management skills, whether you're managing the class environment or you're managing the content, good management skills are essential for effective teaching. Physical education teachers, of course, must maintain order in the gymnasium to encourage high levels of physical activity that's above 50% of the class, to ensure low levels of disruptive behavior. In other words, if you maintain order and the content is interesting for them, there will be low levels of disruptive behavior. To reduce the chance of injury, and of course that means safety, and to increase the chance for student learning. How does a teacher prevent behavior problems? In two ways. They prevent by the management of the class, and they also prevent behavior problems by the content, making it interesting and making it relevant to the students. There are a few problems in physical education in relation to class management and designing an effective learning environment. One is the unique context of physical education programs. Our students are in large areas. They're running around all over the place. Sometimes it looks like they're in complete chaos, but we know that they know exactly what they're supposed to be doing. But it's a large area, a lot of chance for risk of injury, and therefore we have to take that into account when we manage our classes and plan the organizational patterns for our classes. Another problem that we have is that about students who avoid participation, either because they don't embarrassed about not being able to do a skill, or because the content is not applicable to them. In other words, team sports for people who have never done team sports and like individual sports a lot better, or people that just don't want to dress out for whatever reason and they forget their clothes. And usually it's not because they just forgot their clothes. Usually chronic people that don't dress out on a regular basis and avoid participation are doing so because of what we are teaching in our classes. The last thing is that in physical education, no matter what we do about our content in classes, it does have a public nature to it. In other words, students have to perform in front of other students in the class, and that can present some problems with participation. The next few slides are some helpful hints from experienced teachers for how beginning teachers can become successful teachers. Successful teachers display a workable system of rules and procedures. Some of those rules and procedures will have to be coming from the school, and you'll have to conform to what the school wants, and you have to be consistent with that, or your system has to be consistent with their system. But in physical education, you definitely have to have your own system of behavior management rules and procedures. Successful teachers also make clear consequences for appropriate and inappropriate behavior. In other words, consequences for appropriate behavior are what we call rewards. Consequences for inappropriate behavior are what we call deterrents. Successful teachers also monitor students more carefully. In other words, they know exactly what's going on in their classes, whether they're looking that way or not. We call that with itness. In other words, the ability of a teacher to know what's going on behind them, around them, where they don't normally have a vision of sight. Successful teachers also stop inappropriate behavior more quickly. They see it happen, they know it's not appropriate, and they take action immediately instead of ignoring it and hoping it will go away. Successful teachers also give more careful directions and more clear directions and short directions so that students are not sitting there listening to you talk in paragraphs about how many different things they need to do. Give more careful directions, and usually you need to think through what those directions are going to be ahead of time. It's important for teachers to have high expectations of students and again make them accountable for what they're learning. High teacher expectations correlate positively with student achievement. It also correlates positively with being on task for most of the class. So high expectations for student behavior means that you're going to vary your teaching strategies. You're going to make sure that students act responsibly. You're going to clearly define your rules and enforce them consistently. And you will establish a management system all of your own that you can be comfortable with but maintain control of the class. What we're looking for is at least minimum levels of control, but those minimum levels of control usually mean that it's a teacher-directed class. We're trying to move students to be more responsible for their own behavior and for their own learning. You always need to establish a system of rules, procedures, and signals for yourself, for the students in your physical education classes. Class management and behavior problems usually rank second or third to finances and drugs as major problems facing public schools. Behavior problems are a major obstacle to successful teaching and considerably decrease time on task. Behavior problems also cause problems for other kids in the class. It stops other kids from learning. So it's your responsibility as a teacher to, as Barney Fife used to say, nip it in the bud and stop behavior problems immediately. Unfortunately, many teachers leave teaching due to their inability to manage student behavior. But hopefully you're going to get enough experience in your internship and from this class to be able to manage student behavior well. As far as behavior goes, a typical class usually consists of 3 groups of students. 80% of the students in your classes will rarely break the rules or violate principles because they've been taught somewhere along the way how to behave in a responsible and respectful way. 15% of your students will break the rules on a somewhat regular basis or occasionally, and they need teachers to set clear expectations and consequences for them, or they will disrupt learning for the other students. That 15% usually has some type of temporary thing that's going on with them in the class, and normally they're behaving rather well. 5% of the students that you will have are chronic rule breakers and generally out of control most of the time. That 5% is what makes teaching not a fun thing. A lot of times it depends on the chemistry of the class, but one bad apple in the class can make the rest of the class seem like a chore. So it's important to take care of that chronic rule breaker and make sure you have some clear consequences for them. It's important for you to know and to think about, why do students misbehave? One of the major things about students and kids these days is that they don't get enough attention at home. One major reason that students misbehave is because of a lack of attention. If they can't get positive attention and they don't get any attention at all, negative attention, in other words acting out in your class, is better than no attention at all. So that's something to remember, is that we need to be as positive as we can be and give as much positive attention to students, and that will help alleviate or prevent behavior problems. That's the end of podcast 1 for chapter 6.